The crumpled parchment, meant for his younger brother, Lord Edward, fell from the Duke's hand. Its contents, a clandestine confession of love and a desperate plea for elopement, burned into his mind. But it was not the betrayal of his brother he read, nor the brazen audacity of the sender, that truly shattered the formidable Duke of Ravenswood. No, the damning script was undeniably Lady Eleanor's, his own intended bride, outlining a future she planned to seize with Edward, not him. The lavish wedding preparations, the societal accolades, the very foundation of his lineage, all a cruel mockery. If you are listening to this story, don't forget to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments from which part of the world you are listening to this story. I want to know how far it has traveled. Ashworth Manor stood as a testament to established wealth, its grey stone facade softened by generations of climbing roses and ancient wisteria. Within its stately confines, life for Lady Eleanor Ashworth unfolded with a predictable, almost serene rhythm. At 22, Eleanor possessed a delicate beauty, not the dazzling, fashionable sort that captivated ballrooms, but a quiet elegance, with eyes the colour of a summer sky and hair the shade of burnished copper, usually coiled neatly at her nape. She was often underestimated, her gentle demeanour mistaken for an absence of will, her thoughtful silence for a lack of wit. Yet beneath the calm surface, Eleanor possessed a keen mind and a spirit that yearned for something beyond the meticulously arranged patterns of her existence. Her mornings typically commenced with the soft chime of the hall clock at precisely 8, followed by the arrival of Martha, her personal maid, with a tray bearing weak tea and thin toast. After dressing in one of her sensible yet tastefully cut gowns, Eleanor would descend to the breakfast parlour, a sunlit room overlooking the extensive gardens. Her parents, Sir Arthur and Dowager Lady Ashworth, were usually already seated. Sir Arthur, a man of solid, unwavering principles and expansive waistline, would be engrossed in the morning's dispatches from London, while Lady Ashworth, a woman whose every breath was dedicated to the maintenance of propriety, would be supervising the placement of the silver teapots. "Good morning, Papa." "Mamma," Eleanor greeted, taking her customary seat. "Good morning, my dear," Sir Arthur rumbled, barely looking up from his newspaper. "Eleanor, you truly must begin wearing your hair in a more fashionable style," her mother began without preamble. "Lord Alistair will be arriving this afternoon, and we must make the very best impression. He is, after all, the future Duke of Ravenswood." Eleanor's fork paused mid-air. Lord Alistair Fitzwilliam. The very name felt like a silken cord tightening around her heart. Their engagement, forged months ago through careful negotiations between their families, was the topic of endless conversations and the bedrock of her impending future. It was a union lauded by society as an excellent match, consolidating family interests and securing Eleanor's position as a future duchess. For her parents, it was the culmination of years of strategic social navigation. For Eleanor, it was a gilded cage, however splendid. Her days were a tapestry woven with social obligations, each thread tightly controlled. There were calls to be paid and received, embroidery lessons with Mrs. Davies, hours spent at the pianoforte practicing sonatas she found dreadfully dull, but which her mother insisted were essential for a lady of her station. Walks through the meticulously manicured gardens provided her only moments of true solitude, where she could indulge in the forbidden pleasure of unchaperoned thought. She devoured novels, particularly those with heroines who defied convention for love, dreaming of a passion that seemed utterly absent from her own arranged reality. She longed for intellectual companionship, for someone who might discuss the merits of Byron's latest verse or the complexities of economic reform, rather than the price of a gown or the latest society scandal. The afternoon brought a flurry of activity, signalling Lord Alistair's impending arrival. The carriage sweep was meticulously swept, the servants moved with renewed purpose, and Eleanor was gently but firmly ushered into her chambers to prepare. She chose a gown of pale blue muslin, simple but flattering, eschewing the more ornate dresses her mother preferred. As Martha painstakingly arranged her hair into a cascade of soft curls, Eleanor gazed out the window, watching the distant turn of the lane. A carriage, dark and imposing, emerged from the tree line. Her breath caught. Lord Alistair Fitzwilliam was, by all accounts, a devastatingly handsome man. Tall and impeccably tailored, his dark hair was styled with precision, and his eyes, a piercing shade of grey, held an intelligence that was almost unnerving. He carried himself with an air of effortless superiority, a man accustomed to deference. When he entered the drawing-room, a hushed reverence fell upon the household. He greeted Eleanor's parents with practiced charm, a smile that reached his lips, but rarely his eyes. When he turned to Eleanor, his gaze swept over her with an appraising quality that made her feel more like a prized possession than a fiancée. "Lady Eleanor," he said, his voice a smooth baritone, "you are looking serene, as always. The journey was quite tedious, but the thought of seeing you again always lightens the burden." His words were correct, his tone complimentary, yet Eleanor detected a coolness, a formality that belied the warmth of his sentiment. It was an affection born of duty, not desire. "Lord Alistair," she replied, offering a slight curtsy. "We are pleased you arrived safely." Their conversation flowed, guided by her parents' enthusiastic questions about the ongoing preparations for the wedding. Alistair spoke at length of the renovations at Ravenswood, the discussions with architects, the importance of the Fitzwilliam lineage. He spoke of the drapes, the new library wing, the placement of ancestral portraits, all with a meticulous attention to detail. Yet he rarely inquired after Eleanor's opinions or her feelings on any matter. When she ventured a suggestion regarding the layout of the library, he offered a polite yet firm dismissal. "My dear Eleanor, the design has been settled by my mother and myself. Such matters are best left to those with experience." The unspoken implication hung heavy in the air. Experience she, a mere woman, clearly lacked. Later, as Alistair and Sir Arthur retired to the study to discuss estate matters, Eleanor found herself alone with her mother. "He is quite magnificent, is he not, darling?" Lady Ashworth beamed, her face alight with maternal pride. "So accomplished, so utterly devoted to his family's legacy. You are a very fortunate young woman, Eleanor. To be the next Duchess of Ravenswood, it is a position many would give their left arm for." Eleanor managed a faint smile. "Indeed, Mamma, and he clearly adores you," her mother continued, oblivious to Eleanor's quiet resignation. "The way he looks at you, so protective." Eleanor knew it was not adoration. It was ownership. That evening, a heavy stillness settled over Ashworth Manor. Eleanor retreated to her window seat, the moonlight casting long shadows across her book. The volume, a collection of romantic poetry, lay open in her lap, unread. Her mind was a whirl of contradictory emotions. The grandeur, the security, the elevated status that awaited her, these were undeniable boons, but the cost felt immense. To forfeit the possibility of true connection, of a love that stirred the soul for the sake of lineage and societal approval. She thought of Alistair's cold grey eyes, his possessive pride, his subtle dismissiveness. He saw her as a beautiful, suitable adornment, a mother to his future heirs, a custodian of his family's name. He did not see Eleanor, the woman who dreamed of distant lands and challenging conversations, the girl who found solace in the quiet rustle of leaves and the whispered secrets of forgotten books. The wedding, they said, was to be within the month. A mere 4 weeks stood between her and a lifetime of gilded expectations. As the moon climbed higher, illuminating the vast, silent estate, a profound sense of unease settled upon Eleanor's heart. She was a bird in a cage, perfectly crafted and beautiful, but a cage nonetheless, and the door was slowly, inexorably closing. The morning of the engagement ball dawned with a deceptive brilliance. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Ashworth Manor, casting golden patterns across the polished floors, as if nature itself conspired to celebrate the union. Yet Eleanor, standing before her mirror as Martha fastened the final pearl buttons of her gown, felt a growing knot of apprehension tighten in her chest. The dress, an exquisite creation of ivory silk and delicate lace, had been commissioned months ago from London's finest modiste. It was a masterpiece, designed to showcase her as the future Duchess of Ravenswood. The bodice fitted perfectly, the skirts fell in elegant cascades, and yet Eleanor felt as though she were being dressed for a performance in which she had no desire to play the leading role. "You look absolutely radiant, my lady," Martha whispered, her eyes glistening with genuine affection, "like a princess from a storybook." Eleanor managed to smile, though it did not reach her eyes. "Thank you, Martha. You have worked wonders." The ball was to be held at Ravenswood House, the Fitzwilliam family's imposing London residence. It was a grand affair, designed to formally announce the engagement to the highest echelons of society. Over 300 guests had been invited, dukes and duchesses, earls and countesses, members of Parliament, and even a minor royal or two. The preparations had consumed weeks of meticulous planning, overseen by the formidable Dowager Duchess of Ravenswood, Alistair's mother, a woman whose reputation for exacting standards preceded her like a winter frost. The journey to London was undertaken in the Ashworth carriage, with Eleanor seated between her parents. Lady Ashworth chattered incessantly about the guest list, the orchestra, the supper arrangements, while Sir Arthur nodded approvingly, occasionally interjecting with observations about the political connections that would be strengthened by this union. Eleanor remained silent, her gaze fixed on the passing countryside, her mind a tumult of conflicting emotions. Ravenswood House loomed before them as they arrived, its facade illuminated by hundreds of torches and lanterns, casting a warm, inviting glow that belied the cold formality within. Footmen in immaculate livery lined the entrance, and as Eleanor descended from the carriage, the sheer scale of the event struck her with renewed force. This was not merely a ball, it was a declaration, a public consecration of her fate. Inside, the ballroom was a vision of opulence. Crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, their light refracting into 1,000 dancing prisms. The walls were adorned with gilt-framed portraits of Fitzwilliam ancestors, their stern faces seeming to watch the proceedings with ancestral approval. Long tables groaned under the weight of elaborate floral arrangements, white roses, lilies and orchids, their perfume mingling with the scent of beeswax candles and expensive perfumes. An orchestra, positioned on a raised dais, played a stately waltz, and already the room was filling with elegantly dressed guests, their voices creating a low hum of anticipation. Eleanor was immediately swept into a receiving line, positioned beside Lord Alistair and his mother, the Dowager Duchess. The Dowager was a formidable woman in her late 50s, her silver hair arranged in an elaborate coiffure, her gown a regal shade of deep purple. Her eyes, the same piercing grey as her son's, assessed Eleanor with a cool, calculating gaze. "Lady Eleanor," she said, her voice clipped and precise, "you look acceptable. Remember, tonight you represent not only your family, but the future of the Fitzwilliam name. Composure and grace are paramount." "Yes, Your Grace," Eleanor replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. Alistair stood beside her, resplendent in his evening attire, his expression one of satisfied pride. He took her hand, placing it formally upon his arm, and together they greeted the endless stream of guests. Each introduction was a performance, each smile a carefully crafted mask. Eleanor curtsied, murmured pleasantries, and accepted congratulations, with a practiced ease that belied her inner turmoil. As the evening progressed, the ballroom grew increasingly crowded. Eleanor danced the opening waltz with Alistair, his hand firm upon her waist, his movements precise and controlled. He spoke little, his attention frequently drawn to other guests, nodding acknowledgments, his mind clearly occupied with matters beyond their dance. When the waltz concluded, he escorted her to a cluster of matrons, leaving her to endure their effusive praise and thinly veiled assessments of her suitability. It was during a brief respite, as Eleanor stood near one of the tall windows overlooking the gardens, that she first noticed Lord Edward Fitzwilliam. Alistair's younger brother was a stark contrast to the Duke-in-waiting. Where Alistair was commanding and austere, Edward possessed a warmth and an easy charm. His features were softer, his eyes a lighter shade of grey, and his smile genuine. He was speaking animatedly with a small group near the refreshment table, his laughter ringing out above the general din. Eleanor had met him only briefly during previous visits, and he had always been kind, offering her a sympathetic glance when Alistair's pronouncements grew particularly overbearing. As if sensing her gaze, Edward looked up, and their eyes met across the crowded room. He offered a small, encouraging smile, and Eleanor felt a flicker of something, not attraction, precisely, but a recognition of kindred spirit, someone who perhaps understood the weight of familial expectation. The evening wore on, and the moment approached for the formal announcement. A hush fell over the ballroom as the Dowager Duchess stepped forward, her presence commanding immediate silence. Alistair moved to stand beside Eleanor, his hand once again claiming hers, his grip almost painfully tight. "Esteemed guests," the Dowager began, her voice carrying effortlessly across the vast space, "it is with great pleasure that I announce the engagement of my son, Lord Alistair Fitzwilliam, future Duke of Ravenswood, to Lady Eleanor Ashworth. This union represents the joining of two distinguished families and the continuation of a legacy that has endured for centuries." Applause erupted, polite and enthusiastic. Eleanor felt the weight of hundreds of eyes upon her, assessing, judging, approving. Alistair raised her hand to his lips, a gesture that should have been tender but felt performative, designed for the audience rather than for her. It was then that the doors to the ballroom burst open with a force that shattered the carefully orchestrated atmosphere. A young woman, her gown dishevelled, her hair escaping its pins, stumbled into the room. Her face was flushed, her eyes wild with a mixture of desperation and defiance. Eleanor recognized her immediately, Lady Charlotte Pemberton, her own younger sister, barely 19, impulsive and headstrong. "Stop!" Charlotte cried, her voice cutting through the stunned silence like a blade. "You cannot do this! You cannot marry her!" A collective gasp rippled through the assembly. Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face, her hand instinctively tightening on Alistair's arm. But Alistair had gone rigid, his expression transforming from composed pride to cold fury in an instant. "Charlotte," Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible. "What are you doing?" Charlotte stumbled forward, her gaze fixed, not on Eleanor, but on Alistair. "Tell them, Alistair, tell them the truth, tell them about us." The room erupted into a cacophony of shocked whispers. Eleanor felt the world tilt, the ground beneath her feet suddenly unstable. She looked at Alistair, searching his face for denial, for outrage, for anything that would refute Charlotte's wild accusation. But what she saw instead was a flicker of something. Guilt, perhaps, or calculation, before his features hardened into a mask of aristocratic disdain. "This is preposterous," Alistair declared, his voice ringing with authority. "The girl is clearly unwell. Remove her at once." But Charlotte would not be silenced. She pulled a crumpled piece of parchment from her bodice, holding it aloft like a banner. "I have your letters, Alistair. Your promises. You said you loved me. You said we would be together." Eleanor's vision blurred. The room spun. She heard her mother's horrified gasp, her father's blustering protests, the Dowager Duchess's icy command for the servants to intervene. But all of it seemed distant, muffled, as if she were underwater. Alistair released Eleanor's hand abruptly, stepping away from her as if she were suddenly contaminated by association. He moved toward Charlotte, his expression thunderous. "You foolish, deluded girl," he hissed, his voice low but venomous. "Whatever fanciful notions you have entertained, they are nothing but the imaginings of a child. I am engaged to your sister. That is the reality. You are an embarrassment to your family and to yourself." Charlotte's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But you said—" "I said nothing of consequence." Alistair cut her off, his tone brutal. "Any attentions I may have paid you were merely the kindness of a gentleman toward a young lady of his fiancée's family. If you misconstrued them, that is your failing, not mine." Eleanor stood frozen, her mind struggling to process the scene unfolding before her. Her sister, Alistair, letters, promises. The implications crashed over her like a tidal wave. Whether Charlotte's claims were entirely true or exaggerated by youthful passion, the damage was irreparable. The scandal was absolute. The Dowager Duchess moved with swift, decisive action. "Lord Pemberton," she addressed Eleanor's father, her voice like ice, "remove your daughter immediately. This engagement is hereby dissolved. The Fitzwilliam family will not be associated with such vulgarity." Sir Arthur, his face purple with rage and humiliation, seized Charlotte's arm, dragging her toward the exit. Lady Ashworth followed, her sobs audible even above the rising tide of gossip that now consumed the ballroom. Eleanor remained standing alone, abandoned in the center of the vast room, the ivory silk of her gown suddenly feeling like a shroud. Every eye was upon her, some filled with pity, others with barely concealed glee at the spectacle. She was the jilted bride, the humiliated fiancée, the woman whose own sister had destroyed her future. Alistair did not look at her. He turned his back, moving to confer with his mother, his posture rigid with outrage. The message was clear. Eleanor was no longer his concern. She was collateral damage, a casualty of scandal, unworthy of his name or his protection. The whispers grew louder, a relentless tide of judgment and speculation. Eleanor felt her knees weaken, her breath coming in short, shallow gasps. The room, so grand and glittering moments before, now felt like a prison, the walls closing in, suffocating her. With a supreme effort of will, she turned and walked toward the exit. Her head held high despite the tears that threatened to spill. She would not give them the satisfaction of seeing her collapse. She would not crumble before their hungry, judgmental eyes. But as she reached the doorway, the enormity of what had just transpired crashed over her with devastating force. Her engagement, her future, her reputation, all destroyed in a matter of minutes. And the man she was to marry had not even offered a word of comfort or defense. He had simply discarded her. The night air hit her face as she stumbled out into the gardens, the sounds of the ball fading behind her. She sank onto a stone bench, her body finally giving way to the sobs she had held back. The carefully constructed world she had known, however confining, had shattered completely, and in its ruins, Eleanor Ashworth was utterly, devastatingly alone. The journey back to Ashworth Manor was undertaken in a silence so profound it felt like a physical presence in the carriage. Eleanor sat pressed against the window, her gaze fixed unseeing on the dark countryside rushing past, while her parents occupied the opposite bench in a state of barely contained fury. Sir Arthur's face remained an alarming shade of crimson, his jaw clenched so tightly Eleanor feared his teeth might crack. Lady Ashworth wept quietly into her handkerchief, occasionally emitting small, wounded sounds that pierced Eleanor's heart more deeply than any accusation could have. Charlotte had been sent ahead in a separate carriage, banished like a criminal, her fate yet to be determined by their father's wrath. Eleanor's own feelings toward her sister were a tangled knot of betrayal, pity, and a strange, unwelcome understanding. Had Charlotte truly been seduced by Alistair's attentions, or had she simply been a foolish girl mistaking politeness for affection? Either way, the damage was absolute and irreversible. Upon their arrival at Ashworth Manor, well past midnight, Sir Arthur finally broke his silence. "You will remain in your chambers until I decide what is to be done with you both," he declared, his voice hoarse with emotion. "The shame you have brought upon this family is beyond comprehension, beyond forgiveness." Eleanor wanted to protest that she had done nothing wrong, that she was as much a victim as anyone, but the words died in her throat. In the eyes of society, guilt by association was as damning as guilt itself. She was the sister of the scandalous Charlotte, the jilted fiancée, the woman whose family had disrupted the most anticipated social event of the season. Her innocence was irrelevant. The following days passed in a blur of misery. Eleanor remained confined to her chambers, meals delivered by a tight-lipped Martha, who offered sympathetic glances but dared not speak openly. Through the walls, Eleanor could hear the raised voices of her parents, the sound of Charlotte's sobbing, the heavy footfalls of her father pacing the corridors like a caged beast. Letters arrived daily, some expressing shocked sympathy, others withdrawing invitations to upcoming events, and a few containing barely veiled satisfaction at the Ashworth family's downfall. On the fourth day, a letter arrived that would alter the course of Eleanor's life. It bore the seal of her father's elder sister, Lady Agatha Pemberton, a widow who resided in Bath. Aunt Agatha was something of a family legend, a woman who had defied convention by refusing to remarry after her husband's death, instead choosing to live independently, managing her own considerable fortune and surrounding herself with artists, writers and intellectuals. She was regarded by Lady Ashworth with a mixture of admiration and disapproval, a woman who had somehow managed to maintain her respectability while living entirely on her own terms. Sir Arthur summoned Eleanor to his study that afternoon. His anger had cooled to a weary resignation, his shoulders slumped with the weight of social ruin. "Your aunt has written," he said without preamble, gesturing to the letter on his desk. "She has offered to take you in, to provide you with refuge, I suppose, until this scandal dies down, if it ever does." Eleanor's heart leapt with an unexpected surge of hope. "Aunt Agatha, she suggests that a change of scenery might be beneficial," Sir Arthur continued, his tone suggesting he found the entire notion distasteful. "Bath is far enough from London that perhaps in time this disgrace might be forgotten, or at least diminished." "And Charlotte?" Eleanor asked quietly. Her father's expression hardened. "Charlotte will be sent to your mother's cousin in Scotland. She will remain there indefinitely. I will not have her presence contaminating what little remains of this family's reputation." Eleanor felt a pang of sorrow for her sister, despite everything. Scotland might as well be the ends of the earth, a cold exile from which Charlotte might never return. But she also recognized the mercy in her aunt's offer, a lifeline extended when she had expected only condemnation. "When do I leave?" Eleanor asked. "Within the week. Your aunt expects you by month's end." The journey to Bath was undertaken with only Martha as companion, Sir Arthur having provided a modest travelling allowance and a terse letter of introduction. As the carriage rolled westward, leaving behind the familiar landscapes of her childhood, Eleanor felt the first stirrings of something she had not experienced in weeks. Not quite hope, but perhaps the absence of despair. The weight of her parents' disappointment, the suffocating atmosphere of Ashworth Manor, gradually lifted with each passing mile. Bath revealed itself on a grey afternoon, its elegant Georgian architecture rising in graceful crescents and terraces against the surrounding hills. The city possessed a refined beauty, its honey-coloured stone glowing even beneath overcast skies. Aunt Agatha's residence was located on the Royal Crescent, a sweeping arc of 30 terraced houses that commanded a spectacular view over the city and the countryside beyond. The door was opened by a cheerful housekeeper who introduced herself as Mrs. Dawson, and Eleanor was immediately struck by the warmth of the household, so different from the rigid formality of Ashworth Manor or the cold grandeur of Ravenswood House. The interior was tastefully furnished, but comfortable, with books stacked on every available surface, paintings in various stages of completion propped against walls, and the lingering scent of jasmine tea. "Eleanor, my dear child," Aunt Agatha swept into the entrance hall like a force of nature. She was a handsome woman in her early 50s, her dark hair liberally streaked with silver and arranged in a simple but elegant style. Her gown was fashionable but practical, and her eyes, the same sky blue as Eleanor's, sparkled with intelligence and warmth. She embraced Eleanor without hesitation, a gesture so unexpected and genuine that Eleanor felt tears spring to her eyes. "Come, come, none of that," Agatha said briskly, though her own eyes glistened with emotion. "You have had quite enough tears, I should think. Mrs. Dawson, please have tea sent to the drawing room, and perhaps some of those excellent lemon biscuits. My niece looks as though she could use proper sustenance." The drawing room was a revelation, bright and airy, with tall windows overlooking the Crescent's gardens. Comfortable chairs were arranged in conversational clusters rather than formal rows, and the walls were adorned with an eclectic collection of artwork, from classical landscapes to more modern, abstract pieces that Eleanor found intriguing. Once they were settled with tea, Agatha fixed Eleanor with a penetrating gaze. "Now then, I want you to tell me everything. Not the sanitized version your father provided in his letter, but the truth. What actually happened at that wretched ball?" Eleanor hesitated, then found herself pouring out the entire story. The arranged engagement, Alistair's cold formality, Charlotte's shocking accusation, the public humiliation, and the devastating aftermath. Agatha listened without interruption, her expression growing increasingly stern. When Eleanor finished, Agatha set down her teacup with a decisive clink. "That man is a scoundrel," she declared flatly. "Whether he actually seduced your sister or merely led her to believe he had feelings for her, his behavior was reprehensible, and to abandon you publicly, without a word of defense or explanation, unconscionable." "But the scandal," Eleanor began. "The scandal," Agatha interrupted firmly, "is not of your making. You are guilty of nothing except having poor judgment in family connections, and that, my dear, is hardly a crime. Your father should have investigated Lord Alistair's character more thoroughly before arranging such a match." Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of shame and guilt that had been tightening for days. "Society will not see it that way." "Society," Agatha said with a dismissive wave, "is composed largely of hypocrites and gossips who have nothing better to do than tear down those they perceive as vulnerable. But you are not in London now, Eleanor. You are in Bath, and here we shall rebuild your life on your own terms, not theirs." Over the following weeks, Aunt Agatha proved true to her word. She did not coddle Eleanor or encourage her to hide away in shame. Instead, she gently but firmly pushed her niece to re-engage with the world, albeit a very different world from the one Eleanor had known. Bath society, while certainly aware of the London scandal, operated under slightly different rules. It was a city of invalids seeking the healing waters, of retired military officers and their families, of artists and writers drawn by the city's beauty and relatively affordable living. Agatha moved easily through this diverse social landscape, and she began introducing Eleanor to her own circle of acquaintances. There was Mrs. Harriet Blackwood, a novelist who wrote under a male pseudonym and whose sharp wit and unconventional views on marriage Eleanor found both shocking and exhilarating. There was Colonel Ashford, a retired officer who had served in India and regaled them with stories of distant lands and exotic customs. There was Miss Penelope Hartley, a talented painter who had studied in Italy and who invited Eleanor to her studio to view her latest works. But it was at one of Agatha's weekly salons, informal gatherings where guests discussed literature, philosophy, and current events, that Eleanor first encountered Dr. Elias Reed. He arrived late, apologizing profusely for his tardiness, explaining that he had been attending to a patient whose condition had taken an unexpected turn. He was a physician, Agatha explained, who had recently established a practice in Bath after studying in Edinburgh and spending several years working in London's charity hospitals. Dr. Reed was not conventionally handsome in the way Alistair had been. He was of medium height, with unruly dark hair that refused to stay properly combed, and warm brown eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. His clothing, while respectable, lacked the meticulous tailoring of a gentleman of leisure, and there was an ink stain on his cuff that suggested a man more concerned with substance than appearance. He was perhaps 30 years of age, and there was an earnestness about him, a genuine interest in the world and the people around him that Eleanor found immediately disarming. "Dr. Reed, may I introduce my niece, Lady Eleanor Ashworth," Agatha said. "Eleanor, Dr. Reed is one of our most valued members. He brings a scientific perspective to our discussions that keeps us from becoming too mired in romantic idealism." "Lady Eleanor," Dr. Reed said, bowing politely, "I am delighted to make your acquaintance. Your aunt speaks of you often and with great affection." "Dr. Reed," Eleanor replied, offering a slight curtsy, "I am pleased to meet you." The evening's discussion centered on a recently published essay concerning social reform and the responsibilities of the privileged classes toward the poor. Eleanor, who had been largely silent during previous gatherings, found herself drawn into the conversation when Dr. Reed posed a question directly to her. "Lady Eleanor, you have recently arrived from the countryside, I understand. What is your observation of the conditions of the rural poor compared to those in urban areas?" Eleanor hesitated, unused to having her opinion solicited, particularly by a gentleman. But something in Dr. Reed's expression, genuine curiosity rather than condescension, encouraged her to speak. "I confess I have not given it as much thought as I should have," she admitted honestly. "But I have observed that while rural poverty may lack the concentrated misery of urban slums, it is no less real. Tenant farmers at the mercy of landlords, families struggling through harsh winters with inadequate shelter, children who receive no education because they must work from dawn to dusk." Dr. Reed nodded thoughtfully. "A perceptive observation. Poverty wears different faces, but its effects are universally devastating. I have often thought that those of us with education and resources have a moral obligation to address these inequities, rather than simply accepting them as the natural order." The conversation continued, and Eleanor found herself speaking more freely than she had in months, perhaps years. Dr. Reed listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, and treated her opinions with a respect she had never experienced from Alistair. There was no condescension, no dismissiveness, no suggestion that her thoughts were less valuable because she was a woman. As the evening drew to a close and guests began to depart, Dr. Reed approached Eleanor once more. "Lady Eleanor, I wonder if I might impose upon you for a favour. I am organising a small charitable effort to provide medical care to some of Bath's less fortunate residents, and we are in need of volunteers to assist with basic tasks, preparing supplies, keeping records, and the like. Your aunt mentioned that you have an excellent hand and a keen mind for organisation. Might you consider lending your assistance?" Eleanor felt a flutter of something unfamiliar. Anticipation, perhaps, or purpose. I would be honoured, Dr. Reed." His smile was warm and genuine. "Excellent. I shall send word of when we next meet. I believe you will find the work rewarding, if somewhat humbling." After he had departed, Agatha joined Eleanor by the window, watching the last of the guests disappear into the evening. "Dr. Reed is a remarkable man," she observed casually. "Brilliant mind, compassionate heart, and utterly indifferent to social hierarchies. He treats a duchess and a washerwoman with equal respect. He seems very dedicated to his work," Eleanor said carefully. "He is," Agatha agreed. "His family is respectable but not wealthy, minor gentry from Derbyshire. He has made his own way in the world through intelligence and determination. Some in society look down upon him for engaging in a profession, but I find such snobbery tiresome. A man who dedicates his life to healing others is worth a dozen idle aristocrats. Eleanor said nothing, but as she prepared for bed that night, she found her thoughts returning not to the humiliation of the ball or the cold dismissal of Alistair, but to warm brown eyes and a genuine smile, to a conversation where her thoughts had been valued, and to the unexpected possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, her life might hold something beyond the gilded cage she had escaped. Spring arrived in Bath with a gentle insistence, transforming the city's gardens into tapestries of colour and filling the air with the scent of blossoms and renewal. For Eleanor, the changing season mirrored an internal transformation. The week spent in Aunt Agatha's household had worked a quiet magic upon her spirit. The raw wound of humiliation had begun to heal, replaced not with bitterness, but with a growing sense of self-possession she had never before experienced. Her work with Dr. Reed's charitable clinic had become the cornerstone of her new life. 3 mornings each week, Eleanor would make her way to the modest building near the Abbey where Dr. Reed and 2 other physicians provided free medical care to Bath's poor. Her tasks were practical and unglamorous, organizing medical supplies, maintaining patient records, preparing bandages, and occasionally assisting with basic treatments under Dr. Reed's careful supervision. The work brought her into contact with a world she had never truly seen. Washerwomen with hands raw from lye, labourers suffering from injuries sustained in dangerous work, children with hollow cheeks and persistent coughs. It was humbling and, as Dr. Reed had promised, deeply rewarding. Eleanor discovered within herself a capacity for compassion and practical action that her previous life had never called upon. More significantly, she found that Dr. Reed valued her contributions genuinely. He sought her opinions on organizational matters, praised her meticulous record-keeping, and engaged her in discussions about medical ethics and social reform with a seriousness that made her feel, for the first time in her life, truly seen. Their friendship had deepened naturally, built on shared purpose and mutual respect. Dr. Reed possessed none of Alistair's polished charm, but his sincerity was absolute. He spoke to her not as a lady to be flattered or managed, but as an equal, a fellow thinking being. When he smiled at her across the clinic, his eyes crinkling with warmth, Eleanor felt something stir within her that she had never experienced with her former fiancé, a genuine, uncomplicated joy in another's presence. It was Aunt Agatha who first suggested that Eleanor should make a more public reappearance in Bath society. "You have been healing, my dear, and that is good and necessary," she said one morning over breakfast. "But you cannot hide forever. The Bath Assembly Rooms are hosting a grand ball next month, a charitable affair, with proceeds going to the hospital. I think it is time you held your head high and reminded the world that Eleanor Ashworth is not defined by one night of scandal." Eleanor's initial reaction was resistance, even fear. The thought of entering another ballroom, of facing curious stares and whispered gossip, made her stomach clench with anxiety. But Agatha was persistent, and Dr. Reed, when consulted, offered his quiet encouragement. "You have nothing to be ashamed of, Lady Eleanor," he said gently, "and your presence at such an event would lend considerable support to the hospital's cause. But the decision, of course, must be yours." It was that final statement, the acknowledgement of her agency, her right to choose, that ultimately decided Eleanor. She would attend, not as the humiliated, discarded fiancée, but as herself, on her own terms. The preparation for the ball became something of a campaign. Aunt Agatha insisted on commissioning a new gown, rejecting Eleanor's protests about the expense. "You will not enter that ballroom looking like a penitent," Agatha declared firmly. "You will look magnificent." The gown, when completed, was indeed magnificent. It was fashioned from silk in a deep shade of sapphire blue that brought out the colour of Eleanor's eyes, with delicate silver embroidery along the bodice and sleeves. The style was elegant but modern, neither ostentatious nor apologetic. When Eleanor saw herself in the mirror on the evening of the ball, she barely recognized the woman looking back, poised, composed, and undeniably beautiful. The Bath assembly rooms were ablaze with light as their carriage arrived. Eleanor's heart hammered against her ribs, but Aunt Agatha's steady presence beside her provided an anchor. As they entered the ballroom, Eleanor was acutely aware of heads turning, of conversations pausing mid-sentence, of the weight of curious gazes. But Agatha swept forward with regal confidence, and Eleanor matched her stride for stride. The ballroom was filled with Bath society, a mixture of established families, visiting gentry, and the city's professional class. Eleanor recognized several faces from Agatha's salons, and their warm greetings helped ease her tension. Mrs. Blackwood embraced her enthusiastically. Colonel Ashford bowed with courtly grace, and Miss Hartley complimented her gown with genuine admiration. It was perhaps an hour into the evening when Eleanor first saw him. Dr. Reed stood near the refreshment table, engaged in conversation with several other gentlemen. He was dressed in formal evening attire, and while he would never possess Alistair's aristocratic elegance, there was something undeniably appealing about him, an authenticity, a solidity of character that transcended mere physical appearance. When his eyes found hers across the room, his face lit with a smile of such genuine pleasure that Eleanor felt warmth bloom in her chest. He excused himself from his companions and made his way toward her. "Lady Eleanor," he said, bowing, "you look absolutely radiant this evening. I am so pleased you decided to attend." "Dr. Reed," Eleanor replied, unable to suppress her own smile. "I confess I am somewhat nervous, but your presence makes it considerably easier. Would you do me the honor of the next dance?" he asked, extending his hand. Eleanor hesitated only a moment before placing her hand in his. "I would be delighted." The dance was a waltz, and as Dr. Reed led her onto the floor, Eleanor was struck by the contrast with her last waltz, that stiff, formal performance with Alistair at the engagement ball. Dr. Reed's touch was gentle but confident, his movements perhaps less polished than Alistair's, but infinitely more genuine. As they moved through the steps, he spoke to her quietly, asking about her week, sharing an amusing anecdote from the clinic, treating the dance not as a performance, but as an extension of their friendship. "You have become quite indispensable to our work, you know," he said as they turned. "The other physicians have remarked upon it. Your organizational skills have improved our efficiency considerably." Eleanor felt a flush of pleasure at the praise. "I find the work deeply meaningful. It has given me a sense of purpose I never had before." "Purpose suits you," Dr. Reed said, his brown eyes warm. "You have a gift for compassion, Lady Eleanor. It is a rare and valuable quality." As the waltz concluded, Dr. Reed escorted Eleanor back to where Aunt Agatha stood, conversing with a group of matrons. He bowed, thanked her for the dance, and reluctantly excused himself to attend to his other social obligations. Eleanor watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of contentment and longing. It was at that precise moment that the atmosphere in the ballroom shifted. A ripple of heightened interest moved through the crowd, conversations growing more animated, heads turning toward the entrance. Eleanor followed the collective gaze and felt her blood turn to ice. Lord Alistair Fitzwilliam stood in the doorway, resplendent in black evening attire, his grey eyes surveying the room with aristocratic appraisal. And on his arm, smiling with triumphant satisfaction, was Lady Arabella Thornton, a celebrated beauty known for her considerable fortune and impeccable lineage. Aunt Agatha's hand found Eleanor's, squeezing gently. "Steady, my dear," she murmured. "You are stronger than you know." Eleanor forced herself to breathe, to maintain her composure even as her mind reeled. What was Alistair doing in Bath? The London season was in full swing. He should have been in the capital, not here, not at this particular ball. And with Lady Arabella, no less, clearly his new intended, a replacement secured with remarkable speed. As if drawn by some malevolent magnetism, Alistair's gaze found Eleanor across the crowded room. For a moment their eyes locked, and Eleanor saw something flicker in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or calculation. He said something to Lady Arabella, who glanced in Eleanor's direction with barely concealed curiosity, and then, to Eleanor's horror, they began making their way through the crowd toward her. "Lady Agatha," Alistair said smoothly as they approached, bowing with practiced grace. "What a delightful surprise to encounter you here. I had not realized you were in residence in Bath." "Lord Alistair," Agatha replied coolly, her tone conveying precisely the minimum courtesy required. "Bath is my home. The surprise, I should think, is yours. I would have expected you to be occupied with the London season." "Ah, well. Lady Arabella's family has a residence here, and she expressed a desire to take the waters," Alistair explained, his tone light but his eyes sharp. "And of course I could not refuse such a charming companion." Lady Arabella simpered appropriately, though her gaze remained fixed on Eleanor with undisguised assessment. She was indeed beautiful, golden-haired, porcelain-skinned, with features that seemed designed for admiration, but there was a hardness in her eyes, a calculating quality that reminded Eleanor uncomfortably of the Dowager Duchess. "And Lady Eleanor," Alistair continued, finally acknowledging her directly, "I must say you are looking remarkably well. Bath clearly agrees with you." Eleanor lifted her chin, meeting his gaze with a steadiness that surprised even herself. "Thank you, Lord Alistair. I have found Bath to be most restorative." "I am pleased to hear it," Alistair said, though his tone suggested anything but pleasure. "I trust you have recovered from the unfortunate events of last winter. Such a regrettable situation. But I am certain you understand that I had no choice but to act as I did. The scandal, you comprehend, made any other course impossible." The audacity of his words, the implication that he had been the injured party, forced to make difficult decisions, ignited a spark of anger in Eleanor's chest. Before she could formulate a response, however, a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "Lady Eleanor, I believe you promised me the next dance." Dr. Reed had materialized at her side, his expression pleasant, but his eyes hard as they fixed on Alistair. Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude so profound it nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Dr. Reed, yes, of course," she said, placing her hand on his offered arm. "Please excuse me, Lord Alistair, Lady Arabella." As Dr. Reed led her away, Eleanor heard Alistair's voice, pitched just loud enough to carry. A physician. How very practical. The condescension in his tone was unmistakable, and Eleanor felt Dr. Reed's arm tense beneath her hand. But he said nothing, merely guided her onto the dance floor as the orchestra began a new waltz. "Thank you," Eleanor whispered as they began to move. "I did not know how to extricate myself from that conversation." "That man is insufferable," Dr. Reed said quietly, his usual gentle demeanor replaced by something harder. "The arrogance, the presumption, as if he were the wronged party in your broken engagement. He has always possessed a remarkable capacity for self-justification," Eleanor replied, surprised by the bitterness in her own voice. They danced in silence for a moment, and then Dr. Reed spoke again, his voice softer. "Lady Eleanor, I hope you will not think me presumptuous, but I must tell you something. Over these past months, working alongside you, conversing with you, I have come to hold you in the highest regard. Your intelligence, your compassion, your strength of character, these are qualities I admire profoundly." Eleanor's heart began to race, though whether from hope or fear she could not say. "Dr. Reed, please let me finish," he interrupted gently. "I am not a wealthy man, nor do I possess a title or grand estates. I am merely a physician, dedicated to my work, with modest means and no particular social standing. But I am a man of honor, and I would never treat you with the callous disregard that Lord Alistair displayed. If you would permit me, I would very much like to court you properly, with the intention of, should you find my suit acceptable, asking for your hand in marriage." The ballroom seemed to fade away, the music becoming distant, the other dancers mere shadows. Eleanor looked into Dr. Reed's earnest brown eyes and saw there everything she had never found in Alistair: genuine affection, respect, and a regard for her as a person rather than a possession. Dr. Reed, Elias, she said softly, using his given name for the first time. I would be honored to accept your courtship. His smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. You have made me the happiest of men, Eleanor. As the waltz concluded, Dr. Reed escorted Eleanor back to Aunt Agatha, who took one look at their faces and smiled knowingly. Across the ballroom, Eleanor could see Alistair watching them, his expression dark with something that might have been jealousy or wounded pride. Lady Arabella clung to his arm, speaking animatedly, but his attention remained fixed on Eleanor and Dr. Reed. Let him watch, Eleanor thought, with a fierce satisfaction. Let him see that I have not merely survived his rejection, but flourished beyond it. Let him see that I have found something infinitely more valuable than a title or a grand estate. I have found genuine regard, respect, and the promise of true partnership. The remainder of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and well wishes. News of Dr. Reed's courtship spread through the ballroom with remarkable speed, and Eleanor found herself surrounded by Agatha's friends, all expressing their delight and approval. Mrs. Blackwood embraced her warmly. Colonel Ashford shook Dr. Reed's hand with hearty enthusiasm, and Miss Hartley declared it the most romantic development of the season. As the ball drew to a close and Eleanor prepared to depart with Aunt Agatha, Dr. Reed approached one final time. "May I call upon you tomorrow afternoon?" he asked. "There is much we should discuss, and I would very much like to speak with Lady Agatha formally about my intentions." "I would like that very much," Eleanor replied, her heart full. In the carriage ride home, Aunt Agatha squeezed Eleanor's hand affectionately. "I am so very proud of you, my dear. You walked into that ballroom with grace and dignity, you faced your past with courage, and you have chosen your future with wisdom. Doctor, Reed is a good man, and he will make you happy in ways that shallow aristocrat never could have." Eleanor leaned her head against her aunt's shoulder, feeling a peace she had not known in months. "I never imagined I could feel this way, Aunt Agatha. With Alistair, everything felt like duty and obligation, but with Elias it feels like possibility, like partnership, like I am valued for who I truly am, not simply for what I represent. That, my darling girl, is what love should be," Agatha said softly. "Not a gilded cage, but a door opening onto a wider world." As Eleanor prepared for bed that night, she stood at her window overlooking the royal crescent, the city of Bath spread out below in the moonlight. Somewhere in that city, Alistair was likely brooding over her unexpected resurgence, her refusal to remain broken and diminished by his rejection. And somewhere else, Elias Reed was perhaps lying awake as well, thinking of their future together. Eleanor smiled, touching her fingers to the window glass. She had been humiliated, abandoned, and cast aside. But from those ashes she had risen, not as the woman society expected her to be, but as the woman she chose to become. And that choice, that agency, was worth more than any duchy, any title, any place in the rigid hierarchy that had once defined her entire world. The golden cage had been shattered, and Eleanor Ashworth had learned to fly. The morning following the ball dawned with crystalline clarity, sunlight streaming through Eleanor's windows and casting golden patterns across the floorboards. She awoke with a sense of lightness she had not experienced in what felt like years, the memory of Elias Reed's proposal and her acceptance filling her with quiet joy. The contrast with her previous engagement could not have been more stark. Where Alistair's proposal had been a formal arrangement negotiated by their families, Elias's courtship was born of genuine affection and mutual respect. True to his word, Dr. Reed called at the Royal Crescent that afternoon, arriving precisely at 3 o'clock with a small bouquet of wildflowers, simple, unpretentious, and infinitely more meaningful than the elaborate hothouse arrangements Alistair had once sent. Aunt Agatha received him in the drawing room with warm approval, and the conversation that followed was refreshingly straightforward. "Lady Agatha," Elias began, his earnestness evident in every word, I wish to formally request permission to court your niece with the intention of marriage. I am aware that my circumstances are modest compared to what Lady Eleanor might have expected from her previous engagement. My income as a physician is respectable but not extravagant, and I possess no title or grand estate. What I can offer is a life of purpose, a partnership built on mutual respect and affection, and my solemn promise to value and cherish Eleanor for the remarkable woman she is." Agatha regarded him with shrewd but kind eyes. "Dr. Reed, I have observed your character over these past months, and I can think of no man I would more gladly entrust with my niece's happiness. You have my blessing, with the understanding that Eleanor's own wishes are paramount. She has already endured one engagement arranged without proper consideration for her feelings. This time, the choice must be entirely hers." "I would have it no other way," Elias assured her, turning to Eleanor with a smile that made her heart flutter. "Eleanor, I hope you know that I would never presume to make decisions on your behalf. Whatever future we build together will be built as equals, as partners." The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Eleanor's life. Elias courted her with a thoughtfulness that stood in stark contrast to Alistair's possessive formality. They took long walks through Bath's parks and gardens, discussing everything from medical advances to literature to their hopes for the future. Elias introduced her to his work with genuine pride, valuing her insights and contributions. They attended concerts and lectures together, and Elias never once dismissed her opinions or suggested that her thoughts were less valuable than his own. News of their courtship spread rapidly through Bath society, and the reactions were varied and telling. Agatha's circle responded with unanimous approval and delight. Mrs. Blackwood declared it a triumph of substance over superficiality. Colonel Ashford pronounced Dr. Reed a fine fellow, and Miss Hartley began sketching preliminary designs for a wedding portrait. The broader Bath society, however, was divided. Some viewed Eleanor's choice as admirably pragmatic, a woman of tarnished reputation securing a respectable match with a professional man. Others saw it as a shocking descent in social standing, a duke's former fiancée settling for a mere physician. The gossip reached Eleanor's ears through various channels, but she found to her surprise that she cared very little for such opinions. What did concern her, however, was the continued presence of Lord Alistair in Bath. He and Lady Arabella had taken up residence at the Thornton family's townhouse, and they appeared with increasing frequency at social events. Eleanor could not shake the feeling that Alistair's prolonged stay was not coincidental, that his presence was somehow calculated to unsettle her. Her suspicions were confirmed one afternoon when she encountered him quite deliberately at the Pump Room, Bath's famous social gathering place, where visitors came to take the supposedly healing waters. Eleanor had accompanied Aunt Agatha for their weekly visit, and they were engaged in conversation with Mrs. Blackwood when Alistair approached, Lady Arabella conspicuously absent. "Lady Eleanor," he said, bowing with exaggerated courtesy, "what a fortunate coincidence. I was hoping for an opportunity to speak with you privately." Aunt Agatha's expression hardened. "I hardly think that would be appropriate, Lord Alistair." "Please," Alistair said, his tone taking on an unexpected note of urgency. "I merely wish to offer my congratulations on your engagement to Dr. Reed. Surely a brief conversation cannot be objectionable." Eleanor felt Agatha's questioning gaze upon her. Against her better judgment, she nodded. "A brief conversation, in full view of the room. Aunt Agatha, perhaps you might wait just there." Agatha reluctantly moved a short distance away, though her watchful eyes never left them. Alistair guided Eleanor to a quieter corner of the pump room, though they remained clearly visible to all present. "Eleanor," he began, and the use of her given name without title or formality startled her. "I must speak plainly. This engagement to Dr. Reed, it is a mistake. Surely you see that." Eleanor stiffened. "I see no such thing. Dr. Reed is a good and honourable man. He is a physician," Alistair said, his tone dripping with condescension. "A tradesman, essentially. You were meant to be a duchess, Eleanor. You were meant for a life of influence and consequence, not to be the wife of a man who works with his hands among the lower classes. Dr. Reed saves lives, Eleanor replied, her voice low but fierce. He dedicates himself to healing the sick and alleviating suffering. What precisely do you do that is of greater consequence, Lord Alistair. Manage estates, attend parliament sessions where you likely sleep through debates, concern yourself with the arrangement of ancestral portraits. Alistair's jaw tightened. You are angry, and I understand that. The circumstances of our broken engagement were regrettable. But Eleanor, I have come to realize that perhaps I acted hastily. Your sister's accusations, while scandalous, were the ravings of a foolish girl. I should not have allowed them to destroy what we had built. Eleanor stared at him, incredulous. What we had built? We had built nothing, Alistair. You arranged a marriage that would benefit your family's interests. You never once asked what I wanted, what I dreamed of, what I thought about anything of substance. You treated me as a decorative addition to your household, not as a partner or even as a person worthy of genuine regard. That is not true, Alistair protested, though his tone lacked conviction. I held you in high esteem. I intended to provide you with every comfort, every luxury, but not with respect, Eleanor said quietly. Not with genuine affection or partnership, and certainly not with the freedom to be myself rather than the woman you required me to be. Alistair's expression shifted, his aristocratic composure cracking to reveal something uglier beneath. Wounded pride, perhaps, or genuine jealousy. And this physician offers you all of that? A man with no fortune, no title, no standing in society. What kind of life can he possibly provide? A life of purpose, Eleanor replied firmly. A life where I am valued for my mind and my character, not merely for my family connections and my suitability as a breeding vessel for heirs. A life where I can contribute meaningfully to the world rather than simply adorning it. You are being naive, Alistair said, his voice hardening. This romantic notion of love and partnership, it is a fantasy, Eleanor. Marriage is a practical arrangement, a union of families and interests. What you feel for this physician is infatuation, nothing more. It will fade, and you will be left with a life of genteel poverty and social obscurity. Perhaps, Eleanor acknowledged, but it will be my choice, my life, lived on my own terms, that is worth more to me than all the duchies in England. Alistair's eyes narrowed. And what of Lady Arabella? Do you imagine I am happy with that arrangement? She is beautiful and wealthy, yes, but she is also vain, shallow, and tedious. I find myself thinking of you constantly, Eleanor, of what we might have had circumstances been different. The admission shocked Eleanor, not because it moved her, but because it revealed the depth of Alistair's self-absorption. You are engaged to Lady Arabella, she said coldly, and I am courting Dr. Reed. What you feel or do not feel is no longer my concern. I wish you well, Lord Alistair, but I have no desire to continue this conversation. She turned to leave, but Alistair caught her arm, his grip firm enough to be uncomfortable. Eleanor, please, I am asking you to reconsider. I can speak to Lady Arabella, end that engagement. We could begin again, properly this time. I would be different, I promise you. Eleanor pulled her arm free, her eyes flashing with anger. You would be different. You would treat me with respect and regard. How generous of you, Lord Alistair. But I am not interested in your promises or your belated recognition of my worth. I have found something infinitely better. A man who valued me from the beginning, who never needed a rival to make him see my qualities. Now, if you will excuse me, I have no further interest in this conversation. She walked away without looking back, rejoining Aunt Agatha, whose expression was a mixture of concern and fierce pride. Are you well, my dear? I am, Eleanor said, and realized with some surprise that it was true. The encounter with Alistair, rather than unsettling her, had crystallized her certainty. Whatever doubt she might have harbored about her choice had been swept away by the stark contrast between Alistair's calculating self-interest and Elias's genuine affection. Word of the confrontation spread quickly through Bath's gossip networks, embellished and distorted with each retelling. Some claimed that Alistair had begged Eleanor to take him back, others that Eleanor had publicly humiliated him, and still others that Lady Arabella had witnessed the entire exchange and was furious. The truth, as always, was more complex and less dramatic, but Eleanor found she cared little for the speculation. What mattered was the conversation she had with Elias that evening, when he called at the Royal Crescent and found her in the garden, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold. "I heard about your encounter with Lord Alistair," he said quietly, settling beside her on the stone bench. "I hope it was not too distressing." "It was illuminating," Eleanor replied, taking his hand in hers. "He asked me to reconsider, to give him another chance. He suggested that my feelings for you were mere infatuation, that I was making a mistake in choosing you over him." She felt Elias tense beside her. "And what did you tell him?" Eleanor turned to face him fully, her eyes meeting his with absolute certainty. "I told him that I had found something infinitely better, a man who valued me from the beginning, who treated me as an equal, who offered me partnership rather than possession. I told him that my choice was made, and I had no regrets." Elias's expression softened, his eyes glistening with emotion. "Eleanor, I cannot offer you the life you might have had as a duchess. There will be no grand estates, no army of servants, no glittering balls and court presentations. My work will often take me away at inconvenient hours, and there will be times when our finances are strained. But I promise you this, I will spend every day of my life ensuring that you never regret choosing me. I will value your mind, respect your opinions, and cherish your partnership. We will build a life of meaning and purpose together. That is all I have ever wanted," Eleanor whispered, leaning her head against his shoulder. "Not a gilded cage, but a door opening onto possibility. Not a title, but a true partnership. Not possession, but genuine love." They sat together in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, and Eleanor felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The path she had chosen was not the one society had laid out for her, not the one her parents had envisioned, but it was hers, freely chosen and deeply desired. The following weeks brought the formal arrangements for their future. Elias spoke with Eleanor's father by letter, requesting permission for the marriage. Sir Arthur's response was terse, but not unkind. He gave his consent, though he made it clear that Eleanor's dowry would be modest, a fraction of what had been promised to Alistair. Eleanor suspected this was partly punishment for the scandal Charlotte had caused, but she found she did not care. Elias had never been interested in her fortune, only in her. The wedding was planned for early summer, a small, intimate affair to be held in Bath, rather than the grand London spectacle her first wedding would have been. Eleanor found herself actively involved in every decision, her opinions sought and valued. She chose a simple gown of cream silk rather than elaborate white satin, selected wildflowers for her bouquet rather than expensive hothouse blooms, and insisted on a modest guest list composed of genuine friends rather than social obligations. As the wedding day approached, Eleanor made one final visit to Ashworth Manor to collect her remaining belongings and bid farewell to her childhood home. The visit was bittersweet. Her mother wept and lamented the loss of the Duchess title. Her father remained distant and disapproving, but there were also moments of unexpected tenderness. Martha, her faithful maid, embraced her with genuine affection and wished her every happiness. And in a quiet moment alone in her old chamber, Eleanor found a letter tucked beneath her pillow. It was from Charlotte, writing from her exile in Scotland. The letter was brief but heartfelt, filled with remorse and genuine happiness for Eleanor's new beginning. "Dearest Eleanor, I know I have no right to your forgiveness, and I do not ask for it. What I did was unforgivable. Whether my feelings for Alistair were real or imagined, I should never have acted as I did. I destroyed your future out of my own foolish vanity and jealousy. But I have heard of your engagement to Dr. Reed, and I am genuinely happy for you, sister. From what I have learned, he's a good man who will value you as you deserve. Perhaps, in some strange way, my terrible actions freed you from a fate that would have made you miserable. I do not claim credit for your happiness, but I am grateful that some good has come from such wreckage. I hope that someday, perhaps many years from now, you might find it in your heart to forgive me. Until then, know that I wish you every joy and blessing in your new life. Your sister Charlotte Eleanor folded the letter carefully, tears pricking her eyes. The wound Charlotte had inflicted had healed, leaving a scar but no longer causing pain. Perhaps in time there might be reconciliation. But for now, Eleanor was content to let the past rest and focus on the future that awaited her. On the eve of her wedding, Eleanor stood once more at her window in the Royal Crescent, looking out over the city that had become her sanctuary and her new home. Tomorrow, she would marry Elias Reed, and together they would build a life of purpose and partnership. She would not be a duchess, but she would be something far more valuable. She would be herself, fully and completely, valued and cherished for exactly who she was. The golden cage had been left far behind, and Eleanor Ashworth was finally, truly free. 18 months had passed since Eleanor Ashworth became Eleanor Reed, and the transformation in her life was so profound that her former existence felt like a distant dream, belonging to someone else entirely. The modest but comfortable townhouse she now shared with Elias in Bath's Walcott Street was a world away from the grand estates of her youth, yet it was filled with a warmth and authenticity that no amount of marble and gilt could replicate. The morning sun streamed through the windows of their small breakfast room as Eleanor reviewed the accounts for the charitable clinic, her pen moving efficiently across the ledger. She had become indispensable to the clinic's operations, managing not only the administrative details, but also helping to secure funding from Bath's more philanthropic residents. Her ability to navigate both the world of the wealthy and the needs of the poor had proven invaluable, and the clinic had expanded significantly under her organizational guidance. "You are frowning at those numbers," Elias observed, entering the room with his medical bag in hand, preparing for his morning rounds. "Should I be concerned about our finances?" Eleanor looked up, her expression softening immediately at the sight of her husband. Elias's hair was, as always, slightly disheveled despite his attempts to tame it, and there was an ink stain on his collar that he had apparently not noticed. She loved him desperately, with a depth and certainty that still sometimes took her breath away. "Not our personal finances," she assured him, rising to straighten his collar and wipe away the ink stain with her handkerchief. "The clinics. We have more patients than ever, which is wonderful, but our supply costs are increasing faster than our donations. I am composing a letter to Lady Pemberton. You remember her, the widow with the considerable fortune who attended Aunt Agatha's salon last month. I believe she might be persuaded to become a regular patron." Elias smiled, pulling her into a brief embrace. "What would we do without you? You have a gift for this work, Eleanor. You see connections and possibilities that I, in my single-minded focus on medicine, often miss." "We are partners," Eleanor replied, echoing the words that had become something of a motto for their marriage. "Your skills heal bodies. Mine help ensure you have the resources to do so. Neither is more valuable than the other." After Elias departed for his rounds, Eleanor prepared for her own morning activities. 3 days each week, she worked directly at the clinic. 2 days were devoted to fundraising and administrative work. And one day, her favorite, she taught reading and basic arithmetic to the children of Bath's working poor, a program she had initiated 6 months earlier with Aunt Agatha's enthusiastic support and financial backing. As she walked through Bath's streets toward the small schoolroom they had secured near the Abbey, Eleanor reflected on how completely her perspective had shifted. Once she had moved through the world seeing only surfaces, the quality of a gown, the grandeur of an estate, the prestige of a title. Now she saw the washerwoman's chapped hands and knew the labor they represented, saw the thin child and understood the hunger behind his eyes, saw the elderly man struggling with a cough and recognized the inadequate housing and poor nutrition that exacerbated his condition. Her work was not always easy or pleasant. There were days when the suffering she witnessed overwhelmed her, when the sheer scale of poverty and need seemed insurmountable. But there were also moments of profound joy, a child's face lighting up as they successfully read their first sentence, a mother's tears of gratitude when her sick infant recovered, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her efforts had made a tangible difference in someone's life. The schoolroom was already buzzing with activity when Eleanor arrived. A dozen children, ranging in age from 6 to 12, were seated on simple benches, their faces scrubbed clean for the lesson, their expressions eager. Eleanor had learned their names, their circumstances, their dreams. There was Thomas, whose father worked at the coaching inn and who desperately wanted to learn enough to keep accounts. There was Mary, whose mother took in washing and who showed a remarkable aptitude for numbers. There was little James, barely 6, who had lost his father to consumption and whose bright curiosity reminded Eleanor painfully of what potential was wasted when poverty denied children education. "Good morning, students," Eleanor greeted them warmly, and they chorused back their response with enthusiasm that never failed to move her. The morning passed quickly, filled with lessons and laughter, small triumphs and patient corrections. When the session concluded and the children departed, Eleanor remained behind to organize materials for the next class. She was absorbed in this task when a familiar voice spoke from the doorway. "Lady Eleanor Reed, or should I say, Mrs. Reed? I confess I am still adjusting to the change." Eleanor turned to find Lady Arabella Thornton, no, Lady Arabella Fitzwilliam now, standing in the doorway. She was as beautiful as ever, her gown the height of fashion, her golden hair arranged in elaborate curls. But there was something in her expression that had not been there 18 months ago, a tightness around her eyes, a brittleness to her smile. "Lady Arabella," Eleanor said, surprised but composed, "this is unexpected. What brings you to this part of Bath?" Arabella stepped into the room, her gaze sweeping over the simple benches, the slate boards, the worn primers, with barely concealed distaste. "I heard rumors that you were teaching children here. I confess I did not quite believe them until I saw it with my own eyes. The former Lady Eleanor Ashworth, who was meant to be a duchess, reduced to this." There was a time when such words would have wounded Eleanor, when she would have felt shame at the implied diminishment of her circumstances. But that time had long passed. "I am not reduced to anything, Lady Arabella. I have chosen a life of purpose and meaning. These children deserve the opportunity to learn, to improve their circumstances. I am privileged to help provide that opportunity." Arabella laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "How very noble of you. And does your physician husband appreciate your nobility, or is he too busy tending to the unwashed masses to notice?" "My husband," Eleanor said firmly, "values and supports my work, just as I value and support his. We are partners in every sense of the word. But I suspect you did not come here to discuss my marriage. What is it you truly want, Lady Arabella?" For a moment, Arabella's carefully constructed facade cracked, revealing something raw and unhappy beneath. "I wanted to see if the rumors were true, if you were truly content with this diminished existence, if you had any regrets about refusing Alistair when he tried to win you back." "I have no regrets whatsoever," Eleanor replied honestly. "My life with Elias is everything I could have hoped for and more. We may not have grand estates or titles, but we have genuine partnership, mutual respect, and a shared sense of purpose. I am happier than I ever imagined possible." "How fortunate for you," Arabella said bitterly. "I, on the other hand, have everything society says a woman should want. a title, wealth, position, a husband who is considered one of the most eligible men in England. And yet, she trailed off, and Eleanor felt an unexpected surge of compassion. And yet, you are not happy. He does not love me, Arabella said quietly, the admission seeming to cost her greatly. He is courteous. He provides me with every material comfort, but there is no warmth, no genuine affection. He goes through the motions of marriage, but his heart is not in it. And I suspect, no, I know that he still thinks of you. He compares me to you constantly, though he does not say so aloud. I see it in his eyes when he looks at me, a kind of disappointment, as if I am a poor substitute for what he truly wanted. Eleanor felt no satisfaction in this revelation, only sadness. I am sorry, Lady Arabella, truly. You deserve better than to be a replacement, just as I deserved better than to be a possession. Alistair's inability to value the women in his life is his failing, not yours or mine. Arabella's eyes glistened with unshed tears. Do you know what the worst part is? I thought that once we were married, once I had secured the title and position, I would be content. But the emptiness of it all is suffocating. The endless social obligations, the meaningless conversations, the constant performance of being the perfect duchess-in-waiting. There is no substance, no purpose, nothing beyond maintaining appearances. It is not too late to find purpose, Eleanor said gently. Even within the constraints of your position, there are ways to make a meaningful difference. Charitable work, patronage of worthy causes, using your influence to effect positive change. The title and wealth you possess could be powerful tools for good if you chose to use them that way. Arabella wiped at her eyes, her composure returning. Perhaps. Though I suspect Alistair would find such pursuits beneath the dignity of a future duchess. She straightened her shoulders, her aristocratic mask sliding back into place. I should go. I do not know why I came here truly. Perhaps I needed to see for myself that it was possible to choose differently, to find happiness outside the gilded cage. It is possible, Eleanor assured her, but it requires courage and a willingness to value substance over appearance. I hope you find your own path to contentment, Lady Arabella. After Arabella departed, Eleanor stood for a long moment in the quiet schoolroom, reflecting on the encounter. There had been a time when she might have felt triumph at Arabella's unhappiness, might have seen it as vindication or justice, but she felt only compassion now and gratitude for the path her own life had taken. That evening, Eleanor and Elias hosted a small dinner party at their townhouse. The guests were an eclectic mix that would have scandalized Eleanor's mother, Dr. Harrison and his wife, fellow physicians from the clinic, Mrs. Blackwood, the novelist, Colonel Ashford and his daughter, and Aunt Agatha, of course, who had become a permanent fixture in their lives and a doting presence who treated Elias like the son she had never had. The conversation flowed freely, ranging from medical advances to literary criticism to political reform. Eleanor found herself engaged in a spirited debate with Dr. Harrison about the most effective methods for preventing the spread of infectious diseases in crowded urban areas, while Elias discussed the latest surgical techniques with Colonel Ashford, who maintained a keen interest in military medicine. You have built something remarkable here, Aunt Agatha observed quietly, drawing Eleanor aside as the other guests continued their animated discussions. A home filled with warmth and intellectual vitality, a marriage of genuine partnership, a life of purpose and meaning. I am so very proud of you, my dear. Eleanor embraced her aunt, feeling tears prick her eyes. I could not have done any of this without you, Aunt Agatha. You showed me that there was another way to live, that I did not have to accept the limitations society tried to impose upon me. You gave me refuge when I needed it most, and you helped me find the courage to choose my own path. You found that courage within yourself, Agatha corrected gently. I merely provided the space for it to emerge. You are a remarkable woman, Eleanor Reed, and I have no doubt that you will continue to do remarkable things. Later that night, as Eleanor and Elias prepared for bed, She told him about Arabella's unexpected visit and the conversation that had followed. Elias listened thoughtfully, his expression growing troubled. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Choosing this life over what you might have had? The title, the wealth, the social position?" Eleanor turned to face him fully, taking his hands in hers. "Not for a single moment. Elias, what I have with you is infinitely more valuable than any title or estate. We are true partners, building a life of meaning together. I am valued for who I am, not what I represent. I have purpose and agency, and the freedom to make choices about my own life. How could I possibly regret that?" "I cannot give you the luxuries you were raised to expect," Elias said, his voice tinged with the insecurity that occasionally surfaced, despite her constant reassurances. "You give me something far more precious," Eleanor replied firmly. "You give me respect, partnership, genuine love, and a shared purpose. You see me, Elias, truly see me, in a way that Alistair never did and never could. That is worth more than all the duchies in England." Elias pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "I love you, Eleanor Reed, more than I have words to express." "And I love you," Eleanor whispered against his chest. "Thank you for showing me what true partnership could be. Thank you for valuing my mind as much as my heart. Thank you for building this life with me." As Eleanor drifted off to sleep that night, secure in her husband's embrace, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been raised to believe that her value lay in her ability to make an advantageous match, to secure a title and position through marriage, to be an ornament to a powerful man's household. The public humiliation at her engagement ball had shattered that carefully constructed identity, leaving her adrift and uncertain. But from those ruins, she had built something infinitely better. She had discovered her own strength, her own capacity for meaningful work, her own ability to choose her destiny, rather than simply accepting what others chose for her. She had found genuine love with a man who valued her as an equal, and together they had created a life of purpose and partnership. The scandal that had once seemed like the end of her world had actually been the beginning of her true life. The golden cage had been destroyed, and in its place, Eleanor had found freedom, not the reckless, irresponsible freedom of abandoning all duty and obligation, but the profound freedom of living authentically, of making choices aligned with her values, of contributing meaningfully to the world around her. She was not a duchess, and she never would be. But she was something far more valuable. She was herself, fully and completely, living a life she had chosen, surrounded by people who valued her for exactly who she was. And in the end, that was the greatest triumph of all. The secret letter that had exposed the truth about Alistair's character had not destroyed Eleanor's life, as it had seemed at the time. Instead, it had freed her from a fate that would have slowly suffocated her spirit. And for that unexpected gift, Eleanor would be forever grateful. She had bloomed where she was planted, and the garden she had cultivated was more beautiful than any gilded cage could ever have been. If you enjoyed this story of Eleanor's journey from humiliation to triumph, from a gilded cage to genuine freedom, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more dramatic historical tales, and share in the comments which moment in Eleanor's transformation resonated most with you. Was it her courage at the bath ball? Her rejection of Alistair's attempts to win her back? Or perhaps her discovery of true partnership with Dr. Reed? I'd love to hear your thoughts, and remember, sometimes the greatest blessings come disguised as devastating losses. Thank you for listening, and until next time, may you always have the courage to choose your own path.